Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you to everyone for joining today. I'm absolutely delighted to host this exciting panel. So just to give you a little bit of background and context about myself before I hand over to the real superstars. So my career started with a paediatric clinical research nursing. So I went into nursing because I lost a brother, Ben, to a rare disease. And then my sister Bryony had 4 rare cancers. And she grew up in hospital. She had a bone marrow transplant. She then had lots of approved treatments and went into clinical trials. And it was an early access program that actually saved her life. So I went into nursing and I was in the NHS for 15 years, predominantly in Great Ormond Street Hospital in London. I got to work with many patients and families with rare progressive conditions on clinical trials and early access programs. And I administered lots of different investigational medicines and got to see the real impact that they had on these patients' lives. I then went to work for a rare patient group and a rare pharma company before joining Bionical to lead their patient advocacy. So I conduct lots of patient activities internally and externally, and I get to work with some amazing patient groups. And I keep our company focused on our mission, which is to change the lives of patients and families all around the world. Well, that's enough about me. So I'm now going to hand you over to the lovely Alix from Canada, who's from the Isaac Foundation. So Alix, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Naomi. So my name is Alix, and I work for the Isaac Foundation. My background is kind of primarily in education and community outreach and engagement, and I've been with the Isaac Foundation now for almost 5 years, and we are a rare disease patient advocacy organization based in Canada. But being in the rare world, we're quite connected in a global sense, like I know most of you here are. We work kind of primarily with rare and ultra rare disorders. When the foundation started, it was primarily to advocate for and fundraise for research for MPS type 6. And since then, especially kind of in the past decade, kind of grown to work with a range of diseases, different MPS diseases, LALD, CLN2 Batten, which you're going to hear a lot about shortly. And yeah, like many of the organizations here today, we do, a range of different things: patient education, kind of individualized patient support, fundraisers to support research. We currently have 3 projects in clinical trial or heading into clinical trial. But the bulk of our work is really around access to medications. So whether those are, investigational treatments or drugs that are perhaps post-approval but are stalled in that kind of reimbursement negotiation stage. So yeah, really looking forward to today's discussion with everyone.
Thank you so much, Alix. And now over to Alison, who's our assistant professor from New York.
Hey everyone, so I'm Alison Bateman-House. I'm an assistant professor of medical ethics at NYU School of Medicine in New York City. I was in college when a student at my university was diagnosed with a rapidly progressive cancer. She sought access to an investigational product through an expanded access program because she didn't qualify for the clinical trial. The company denied it and she ended up passing away. And this was a highly publicized event in our very small college. And I just was introduced to this topic. I'd never had any experience with it before. And continuing on in medical ethics, particularly with an interest in access to investigational products, you kept seeing stories like this come up year after year after year. There'd be a story, everyone would talk about it, it would die away. Then there'd be another story, everyone would talk about it, it would die away. And I just kept thinking, honestly, we should be able to come up with a better system than to keep having everyone go through the same experience repeatedly. So when I was hired at NYU, I decided that since no one else was doing this, I would try to do this. And I co-founded an international group that works on access to investigational medicines. And I'm really delighted to be here today to share my experiences with you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Alison. And over to Lucy and Mike. I just wanted to start by saying happy birthday to Amelia. She's 8 today. Thank you so much for joining us today on her special day. I hope she's having a lovely day. And yeah, if you could just tell us a little bit about your incredible journey so far and why pre-approval access is so important to you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. Yeah, she's having a lovely day. Thank you. So I'm Lucy and this is my husband, Mike. We've got 5 children. We've got 3 boys and 2 girls, and 2 of those children have been diagnosed with CNL2 Batten disease. So we live in the UK. Ollie and Amelia, who've got CNL2 Batten disease. Ollie's 10 and Amelia is 8. And they were both diagnosed in 2015. And at the time of diagnosis, we were actually told that there was no treatment and no cure. And we were basically in the hospital room, and we were given an A5 piece of paper, and we were told to go home and basically enjoy the time that we have left with our children. CNL2 Batten disease is a neurodegenerative condition where children are born completely healthy until their age of about 2 to 3, when symptoms start to occur. They lose all their abilities, so the ability to walk, the ability to talk, to see, to swallow, and they suffer from movement disorders and seizures. Their life expectancy is between 6 and 12 years. So you can imagine we were completely devastated to learn that there was nothing out there that could help our children.
Yeah, so as Lucy said, from the diagnosis we received, we got told that there was no treatment, there was nothing going on, nothing in the world that was going on, just to enjoy your children. So obviously devastating. We go home, let it sink in, and then after so many days, the research began. We started to research into other things. We found the patient organisation for Batten's disease in the UK. We called them, and they told us that there is a trial ongoing for Batten's disease CNL2, and we should contact the professor at Great Ormond Street. So obviously the next phone call was to contact the professor. I can remember a phone call like it was yesterday, asking him what can he do for our children. There was a real desperate, anxious sort of feeling inside, because from being told that we were going to lose our children, you felt that we were going to lose them then. So we had to really act quick. So yes, I spoke to the professor, and he unfortunately told me that all the places for the clinical trial had been taken up, and he couldn't get our children onto it. He couldn't help the children at the time, and obviously that was devastating. And then moving on from that, we contacted the drugs company for that were doing the clinical trial. Now, we didn't know anything about compassionate use or compassionate use programs. Obviously, we were real novices in the medical field. Well, we're still novices, really, in medical fields.
I think you know quite a lot now.
We just know a little bit about CNL2. So, yes, we found out about compassionate use programs, and we found that out through the patient organisation and the trust company that we were in contact with. And we were trying to get our children onto a compassionate use program, and we were trying to act very quick on this. So, cutting it a sort of a very long story short, because it was a very long journey, a very rocky journey, if I'm honest.
Mike, sorry, before you go on, so from
Yes.
diagnosis to obviously being told that there's no treatment, go home and make memories, to actually finding out that wasn't true and there was a trial, but then being told, just to recap, that they weren't eligible, but then there was a compassionate use treatment option and that they could potentially get onto that. How long was that time? Is that a few months, a year? How long was that time from?
No, the time was around 18 months.
Wow, 18 months.
So obviously, as you can appreciate, with a neurodegenerative disorder that's very rapid, things change quite quickly without a treatment. So we continue to fight and try and get the children onto this medicine, because we were finding out data from the patient organisation that the drug was working. It was all good data that was coming through.
Wow.
So yeah, loads of phone calls with pharmaceutical company, and they decided, should I say, to call a meeting in Paris. And thankfully, we were able to go to that meeting with the patient organisation and talk to the drugs company, as well as some other parents from other countries, and give our views and our story about the children. It was a very emotional time, if I'm honest. And after that, they did grant that they were going to open a compassionate use programme. They were going to have one in the UK, in London, at Great Ormond Street, and they were going to have 5 children, open it up to 5 children. Obviously, like I say, this took around 18 months from this point. Ollie had lost a hell of a lot of abilities in this time. We witnessed him not being able to walk. He had to have a gastrostomy, so we had to feed him via a tube. He was having endless seizures every day. So yeah, in that time frame, it was very, very difficult. And what was also very difficult is, I'll just touch on it, that in other countries, when the drugs company granted the compassionate use, the other companies were up and running within 8 to 10 weeks.
So sorry, Mike, so that was other countries. So in the UK, you had to wait, but in other countries, you knew children that were getting access, but you guys had to wait. Yeah,
we had to wait, yeah.
And weren't you told at the beginning that Amelia was too well and Ollie was too sick? Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's part of the journey for the compassionate use. We did get told Ollie will be too poorly for it, which was absolutely devastating. And then on the next breath, we were told that Ollie will get on it. He is well enough. Obviously, he is poorly, but he will qualify. But our daughter Amelia is too well for it, because Amelia hadn't suffered any seizures at this point. So we just couldn't get our head around that, because we thought that these drugs were there to help children, and our children needed help. Amelia was very well, so let's try and prevent her getting to the stage that Ollie was getting to. And then I say thankfully, it was thankfully that they said Amelia would get a position, one of the 5, but that meant that a friend of ours who also had a child with CNL2 Bateman's disease, he was too poorly for it, so Amelia took his place. And devastatingly, that child now is passed away.
So sorry to hear that. And then Lucy touched on a time when you were told it was definitely just 5, and obviously you lost your friend's child, and then there was one other child that did get on later on, and that was maybe because they had some medical connections, because his father had worked in one of the hospitals.
Yeah, so that's right. So we believe another child gained access on compassionate use when we were told it was only 5 places. And we believe that child's parent worked in the hospital. But obviously we're just so grateful that another child could get on at that point. It was like a little miracle, wasn't it?
Yeah,
really?
It was great. It was fun, because originally, obviously, we've been told about the 5 positions being opening, and it was full stop. It is 5, and that is it. No more.
Were you given a communication to why there was 5?
Not really. No. We could only put it down to maybe a financial reason, maybe.
Okay.
Possibly.
I think I'm going to stop you there and come to Alison, because she has a wealth of knowledge and expertise advising pharmaceutical companies, obviously in development for investigational medicines, and actually in this impossible situation with this impossible task to decide how many children get access to compassionate use. Alison, can you touch some light on that, of what the best practices are?
I mean, we typically advise companies that it's never too early to start thinking about this, simply because one of the real limiting factors in making such access available is in supply. And supply is not something that you normally can just whip up overnight. It takes a while to develop these products. And especially if it's not a large pharmaceutical company that has their own manufacturing facilities, they have to hire, some sort of manufacturing facility to create these products. And those things take years in advance of pre-scheduling. So if you haven't started thinking in advance, are we going to do non-trial access and of what size? You end up having just, your tiny little dribs and drabs left over, which mean that these access programs will be tiny. So for any company that happens to be listening, we just urge it's never too early to start thinking about this. Like if you're starting a development program, you should start thinking about, am I going to provide access? And it's perfectly reasonable in some sorts of situations to not provide access. And it's also perfectly reasonable to say we're not going to provide access until X point. So, we have safety information or we have efficacy information or, where you as an entity are comfortable providing access. But you need to have at least thought that through ahead of time. And then you need to be transparent in messaging it to people when they ask you or to patient advocacy groups or what have you, instead of having people just sort of lost at sea, not knowing what's happening. So that's the sort of takeaway that I would want to say from that story to pharmaceutical companies. But if I can, Naomi, I just want to make a larger point. Listening to that story, it's so easy to get caught in the emotion of, this is a terrible thing for a family to have to go through. This is a terrible thing for a patient to have to go through. And I don't want to take away from that at all. But I would like to pull back and say, there's some policy issues here that I think are important for people to be aware of. And the thing that, I'm an ethicist, I tend to deal with ethics related questions. And the thing that was so blatantly obvious to me in that story is the lack of equity of access. So I just want to highlight some points from that story. They were initially told that there was nothing available. That's what their doctor told them. And in many cases, a family would have said, there's nothing available. I'm going to go home and spend the time that I have remaining with my child because there's nothing available. But that's not what they did. They reached out to a patient advocacy group and found out that there actually was a trial. And I just want to underscore that you have to have time to be able to do that, to find the patient advocacy group and to call them. You have to have some familiarity with just medicalese, or at least what's available out there. Think of, like someone who doesn't speak the language, someone who doesn't have internet access, someone who is, working 3 jobs to put food on the table. They're not going to be able to pursue this. So there's huge equity issues just in order of who even is able to make that next step. And we should not have parents or patients have to do that. We really desperately need to find some way that first point of contact with the medical system is actually able to say, yes, there is a trial, or, there is a trial and it's full, but here's who you should talk to. It should not be on families or patients to have to do this. So that's a system thing. And it's not a pharmaceutical company thing. It's a medical healthcare system thing. And every country has their own healthcare system. And in the United States, we have at least 3 healthcare systems, right? Because we don't have a national system. We have, a public one for people who can't afford private ones. We have a private one, et cetera. So, I realize this is a huge lift, but it's a huge lift that we have to make. And then the other thing I want to point out is there was a mention of, there being this difference between countries. People were getting earlier access outside of the UK than inside the UK. Another huge lift. I mean, I see people quite frequently who move from country to country to get access for themselves or their child. And it's just ridiculous that people would have to do that. So that's something else we need to be aware of. And then this sort of suspicion that someone got access because there was a medical connection in their family. And one of the things that I frequently am working with pharmaceutical companies is we don't want there to be preferential access to people because they just happen to know somebody or they happen to be at the right place at the right time. We need to be able to have fair systems that have on blinders and don't give preferential access. And at least in the United States, I know if you can't get access, it's quite common to call up your legislator or your senator or your member of Congress and ask them to put pressure on the company. And people do that because it works, but it shouldn't work because, again, that sets up an inequity of who even has the wherewithal to do that and who's going to get companies pressured on their behalf and who doesn't. So I'll stop there, but I just want to say, just that story had at least 3 different points in it that point out the inequity in the system. And I think that's something that we all need to be aware of when we're talking about this access outside of trials. And of course, access in trials, right? Because there's inequities in who gets in trials too. So.
Thank you, Alison. No, you've raised some fantastic points there, and I think that, you know, we could discuss that probably, yeah, for just those 3 points that you just mentioned for the rest of the hour. But I will move on, because we have lots more to discuss. And Alix, I'm going to turn to you and just see if you could just give us the patient advocacy perspective, because I know, obviously, caring for a lot of these families and talking to Lucy and Mike, that they need a lot of emotional, physical and financial support, and I know the Isaac Foundation does that beautifully.
Well, and just, you know, I had read about Lucy and Mike's story before, and then obviously meeting with both of you, and it's heartbreaking how familiar your story is. Like, we've had the patients and families that we work with in Canada, I can't count how many times we've heard, you know, their physician told them to go home and enjoy their child. And then there's this delay in learning about other options or treatments or trials or things that are out there that, you know, you weren't necessarily connected with at the beginning. So I guess I'm just going to touch on a couple of different points, not to completely like echo what Alison was saying, but I think from, you know, the patient group perspective, one of the best things that you can do is try to engage as early on as possible with the manufacturer, with the industry, so that you can, you know, hopefully it's the beginning of clinical trial design. Like, that would be ideal if patient groups were engaged in communicating from that early stage. And then you're able to make sure that they better understand patients, the disease burdens itself. And that would kind of give a greater sense and development and a real insight into the reality of living with this disease, and an ability to kind of set realistic expectations of what does success look like for the trial, or what does it look like for an EAP. For EAPs, you know, if real world data or evidence is being collected, what are kind of the key sensible data points that would be useful for collection? And also just being able to share your unique patient community, you know, barriers they're facing, whether those are geographical, economical, anything that would kind of prevent them from participating in a program like this. Also different, if there are different types or subtypes of the disease, making sure that those are also considered in the design of these programs. And specifically for Brineura, we had, for the treatment for CLN2 Batten, we had a very different experience here in Canada. We actually didn't end up having an expanded access program at all. And that was because my colleague, Andrew McFadden, began discussing quite early on with the company about this disease. You know, we had been following it from the earlier stages of the clinical trial, and those kind of conversations and that openness and that transparency allowed him to connect with people here, you know, whether it's the government or payers. And so he was able to kind of advocate and just put this on people's radars from an early stage. But that takes everybody getting on board. And a lot of diseases, you know, don't necessarily have an advocacy group that is bridging the gaps between industry, payers, and government, or, you know, don't necessarily have industry, payers, or government that are willing to kind of jump in these conversations and kind of take a collaborative approach to ensure that access is expeditious as it possibly can. And for us, you know, I mean, my colleague Andrew will be able to speak better to this, but I don't think it's ever gone as smoothly like this for us in the past. This wasn't, you know, this isn't how it usually goes, but it kind of really gave our organization, and I think, you know, payers and other people at the table, real insight into how the drug approval and reimbursement process can go. Like, it is possible for it to go smoother than it often goes, so that you're not like in this limbo where there's not, you know, this very small access program and all the uncertainty that kind of goes along with that. So
thank you, Alix. That's brilliant perspective and insights. And yeah, it's very interesting to see how it works differently in different countries, and obviously disappointing to see the diversity, really. But coming back to Lucy and Mike and moving on to, I suppose, the next stage. So when you were left again, I suppose, in limbo, you got Amelia and Ollie on the treatment, but then were told that you weren't sure if that was going to continue, and if NICE, so in England, the payer, to give a positive opinion or negative opinion, you were told that that was probably going to be negative, and then going to the actual committee and going to the media and getting support and the next kind of stages really of what happened there. And I suppose it's important to kind of say that you got to give your own perspectives and how the drugs affected your children and how it's kept them at a level that they're at, and not declining, because in rare, time means decline, and you wanted to keep them on that drug, and you were told at first that they might not be able to stay on it, and you were having to fight to be on a managed access program and to get the drug paid for. Is that correct? Can you just tell us a little bit about how you did that and taking Amelia and Ollie to NICE?
Yeah, thank you. So we were really lucky, really, that we had the opportunity to be like patient representatives and patient advocates, really, on the NICE panel. So we attended quite a few meetings, and we were able to give our opinions. So the professionals were there from the hospital, the pharmaceutical company, and the patient organisation. But us as parents, we felt like it was really, really important that we were able to sit there and voice our opinions and give the real world data on how the children, how we feel that they're doing on this treatment. Now we have the data in front of us that showed that the treatment was slowing down the progression of the disease. Now we went to these meetings for probably over 12 months, and then we got to a point where they made a decision on whether they would fund the treatment or not. Obviously, if it came through that they wouldn't fund the treatment, then the treatment would be removed from our children, and they would deteriorate rapidly, and obviously they would pass away. And devastatingly, we got the news that NICE decided that NHS England shouldn't fund this treatment for all the children that were accessing it. So at that point, again, we felt like we couldn't take that lying down. So we gained legal advice, and we won our appeal to take NICE and NHS England to the High Court under judicial review. And it was from that thankfully we got that decision overturned, and the treatment is now on a managed access agreement for the next 5 years. So we're really thankful, really, that we were asked by the patient organisation to be involved in that process. Now during that process, we were constantly asking the panel to view the children, to look at pictures, to look at videos, to even meet them. And over again, we were told no, that it wasn't allowed. That's not the way it works. They will just see our children and other children on the treatment as numbers. They don't even have names, and we just thought that isn't fair at all. So in the end, after being refused, we knew that the panel would have to walk through a certain way into the building. So we took Amelia, who was running around, playing, talking, smiling, laughing, waving at them as they walked into the meeting. And we truly believe that made a massive difference to the decision that was made, because, like it or not, they were able to see a child who was benefiting massively from this treatment.
Thank you. And did you also, was that the same time when you got to meet Prince Harry and the Prime Minister? Was it Theresa May? And you went on some TV shows, and do you think that made any difference?
Yes. So also during this process, we used the media in a positive way, because we had that data there to show that the treatment was working, and we also had the proof in our own children, because obviously we were in a really individual position where we had our child Ollie, who'd started on the treatment later into the disease, and it had stabilised him and it had stopped the seizures. But then we also had a child, Amelia, who was one of the youngest children in the world to access this treatment, and she was doing absolutely amazingly. So we had that difference really between the two children, and we were able to get the support from celebrities, the media. Ollie won an award, and we met Prince Harry, and then he came down to Great Ormond Street Hospital and showed his support again to us and witnessed the children having the treatment. And then, yes, we were asked on to This Morning, which is like a national TV programme in the UK. And we were able to, again, tell our story, gain public support. And yes, we surprisingly, just by chance, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, at that time, was also on This Morning. So we were able to speak directly with her. We also went to Parliament. We met with the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, and we were able to also pull in support from our local MPs. So we went in every direction we possibly could.
Yeah, we did. But I would just quickly say, just from what Alison said, with having time, and some people don't have that time. And this took a hell of a lot of time, a hell of a lot of effort, a hell of a lot of money, funding. We had to instruct a barrister, which was £4,000 an hour, all to get this decision for our children. But we will never get that time back with our kids. And should we have had to go down that road? Probably not, but we did.
And was it right to say, Mike, that you had to spend obviously a lot of time fighting for access doing this, and that your own company suffered?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I had my own building company at the time, which I haven't got anymore. Financially, it's a big hit on us as a family, and other families as well. I just don't know whether the system should be made easier for families who are suffering with children with a rare disease.
Of course. And you're now told that you're on a managed access programme for 5 years to collect the real world data, and then for that decision to be made if it was be continued with funding.
Yeah, that's it. So we've got about 4 years left on that managed access agreement. But again, in the back of our minds, we're thinking, have we got to go through the whole process again? When that ends, we just don't know. And it's the constant, the time, like Mike said, the time away from the children, the constant fundraising. You know, we haven't got money like that, so we have to pull in from support from elsewhere. And people may not understand how much time that takes, even trying to organise a simple fundraising event. It takes months and months and months to do. Especially in a pandemic. Yeah, it's even harder.
And the data that they're collecting now, do you think that's the right data to see that this drug is working? And how is it done in the hospitals, and is anything done at home?
So some of the data obviously is collected in the hospitals, and some data we can understand why that has to be collected in the hospital if they're doing like measuring like EEGs and MRI scans and stuff like that. Obviously that has to be in the hospital, but then we also have like psychology assessments, and we believe that assessments like that should not be done in a hospital environment when a child has just had a 4-hour brain infusion. We are about 5-hour drive away from the hospital, which we make the same day, and then they have to undertake, you know, all these assessments. A lot of them are done obviously over the phone or via Zoom now, which obviously can't be helped in a pandemic. But we believe that real world data is key. You know, we should be able to send video footage in, we should be able to take school reports. There should be a psychologist that can go into school and observe, you know, the children playing. Same with speech and language therapy and physiotherapies. They should be able to take, you know, go into schools and just do a report and send them to the hospital, rather than, like we say, having a very, very long journey, then a brain infusion, and then be expected to like run around a hospital and perform. And you know, the children just aren't in the mood to do that. And then we believe you're not getting the real picture of a child there. You're not getting how they are really developing. And also it is a snapshot, you know, a half an hour psychology assessment when you've got, you are sat there with your child who just wants to go off and play with toys and, you know, or want to go to sleep. That's not the real child.
Thank you, Lucy. Okay, I'm going to come to Alison because I'm sure there's lots of points that she can comment on that. starting back from the NICE committee. And I think it's interesting to see Alison's point of view of that, because I think it's an impossible task for the committee, and you're put in that situation often when you're on ethical boards.
I actually want to talk about something else, if I can, for just a
Yeah,
second, which is the thing that really caught my attention in that response is the idea that Lucy and her family have an idea of how long they're in this managed access program. And that's really something that I try to hit for industry members as a best practice, because frequently patients or their families don't know to ask what they don't know to ask. And one of those things is sort of like, what's the timeline and what will I anticipate downstream? So I really encourage companies and clinicians and whoever to prepare people and to say, you're in this trial, and this trial is going to end in 2 years. And after the trial, we're either going to provide you access through a post-trial access program, or we're not going to provide you access through a post-trial access program, or in 12 months when we do a data readout, we will decide if we're going to give access, just to help people know what's coming, because frequently when you're focused on the here and now, you're not even thinking about what's going to happen, but then it comes and you're like, wow, I wasn't prepared for this. I didn't know. And the same thing with non-trial access. So fine, you're offering an expanded access program now. Is that going to be for the life of the child? Is that going to be until the drug comes to market? Is that going to be until there's a negotiated price? Or is that going to end at some point because we only made like a 3-year commitment? And I just think it's incredibly important to tell people up front so they know what their what their sort of trajectory of access is, and also to know, I need to be looking for other options because this is not a long-term solution. So I think that's the thing I wanted to hit on that. I guess the only other comment I will make is, hearing about how NICE had all the different stakeholders at the table. That's also one of the things that I point out as a best practice for everybody. And let me just give you an example. This is an approved drug, so I'm able to talk about it. There is a drug called Spinraza for spinal muscular atrophy. It is produced by a company called Biogen. It's been approved pretty much around the world at this point. But it's not available in all countries, right? So Biogen made a decision that we're going to seek approval to be able to sell our drug in certain countries, and there are other countries where we're just not going to. And so if you're in those countries, you either have no access, or you need to relocate to someplace. You need to move from, say, India to the UK where you can get access. Or in some circumstances, and for some companies, they might set up a humanitarian aid program and say, we're not going to bring this drug to market, but we're going to make it available to patients there who need it, typically for free, because it's not being sold. It's a humanitarian aid program. And I'm giving this just as an example of why it's important to have different opinions at the table, because I'm involved in this one humanitarian aid program where the company gives a small amount of drug for free, but only to a fraction of the patients who could actually use it in the country. And so then the question is, how do you decide, if you have 100 patients and drug for 5, how do you decide who those 5 are? And you could say, well, the fairest way is just to have a lottery. We're going to put all the names into the hat and we're going to pull out 5. And that's a way to do it. And actually, I'm okay with that, because I think it is actually fairer. But I mean, it's of course emotionally destroying to know your child's chances depend on a luck of a draw. But the other way to do it is to say, we're not going to do a random drawing. We're going to actually make a case-by-case decision. And that's where you really need to have people at the table, because you could say, we're just going to bring in a bunch of doctors and let them decide. And what doctors prioritize in terms of, well, this is how long we think the child will live, or we think the child might achieve some motor function or whatever, is quite frequently different from what parents prioritize. So, when I work with a company, I'm frequently saying, if hard choices have to be made, they have to be made. I mean, sometimes we can't ignore hard choices, but you can't just say, this person in this office behind closed doors is going to make them, or we're going to bring in a bunch of doctors and have them make them. You really owe it to your patient population to engage with people and say, we're going to have a dad at the table. We're going to have a mom at the table. We're going to have a patient at the table. We're going to have these outside perspectives because they have insight into things that is different from what we as a company or even as clinicians can provide. And it's going to enable us to make a more defensible decision, even if it is a tough decision, because tough decisions often have to be made. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Alison. And Alix, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I suppose further to Alison's points about bringing in different perspectives and what's important to a patient family versus what's important to a clinician or a physician. Often have the example of the often much maligned 6-minute walk test as kind of a marker, right? And so, what looks like maybe a really marginal improvement on paper that would be negligible to perhaps a reviewer just looking at this. And I'm stealing my colleague's anecdote for this, but that's a huge difference to a family, because that means that child or that adult can maybe walk from their house to their car, and then that gives them the independence and the mobility to then go about their life and run their own errands or go to work or do whatever it is. So I think having those perspectives at the table is so important, and that's what I think this whole session also comes back to, is like collaboration and transparency. Kind of some of the things also that have been discussed here. If patient groups are in, obviously they're in communication with their patients, but with industry as well, and kind of a clear understanding and advocating for their patients in terms of what the EAP will look like. That communication then lets you properly educate and support patients. So at the Isaac Foundation, we hold an annual patient symposium. And so we're constantly updating our families as research progresses and, what programs are opening up. And that also allows us to set kind of realistic expectations in terms of whether there are supply issues, so there's only a certain number of spots, or there's eligibility criteria and things like that, and helping to communicate those timelines that Alison was saying, because I know that is even if you have 5 years on this managed access program, that is still a cloud over your head, and you're kind of counting down to that date that it finishes. And to have an understanding of those timelines and what happens when that finish date comes, like what happens then. And that's something that I think is really important for patient groups to help kind of not only advocate for, but communicate regularly with their patients and with kind of everybody at the table.
And Naomi, can I just say one last thing that I should have added? So I've been sort of talking about, industry as opposed to patients, as two separate entities. But I think it's important to remember that those are not stark dividing lines, and that sometimes members of industry actually become the patients, or they have patients in their family. And so one of the things that I am, continuously urging people to say is your policy needs to be your policy for all patients. So if your CEO's son is diagnosed with this disorder, your access policy for your CEO's son or your CEO's wife or sister, whoever, need to be the same as your access policies for, the undifferentiated patients out there that you don't know. You cannot say we're not providing you access, or we're providing you access for 12 months and then just give it to your own child. So, I really do try to break down that divide between industry and patients, just to say, you never know who it is who's going to put in that request. It could be secretary, it could be, your sister. So I do try to break those divides down.
I think that's really important, Alison. Thank you for raising that point. And I think just to be clear and as transparent as possible, and to communicate, and early communication is what I'm hearing the most. So I'm conscious of time. We've only got 15 minutes left. I haven't seen any other questions come in, so I'm going to go in with another question that I'm hearing a lot at the moment from the rare disease community. Is right now we're in a pandemic, so is there any way that the treatments and vaccines and all of this that's coming out for COVID-19, it's been amazing how it's been expedited and that we've got treatments and vaccines, but obviously the rare disease community have been waiting decades, some are still waiting. And to quote Andrew, where's our warp speed? As in, what can we learn from this year? There must be some things that we can learn and maybe take into the processes. There's no way that we can work 24 hours around the clock every day, all day, which I know people have been, but there must be learnings that we can take, and hopefully we can expedite some of the processes, and hopefully not make families wait like Lucy and Mike for years. Alison?
Yeah, so I'll hop into that, and then I'm interested what the rest of the panel thinks. So I think that there are definitely lessons we can take away. And I think some of those lessons are a closer coordination between industry and clinicians and government and regulators in terms of, you know, for COVID-19, everybody has been working together so closely and so proactively. It's not, you know, come up with a trial and then come talk to us about the trial. It's like, let's develop the trial together. Let's develop, you know, something that is going to be effective, you know, from a regulatory standpoint, as well as a clinical, you know, proof standpoint. And I think that's something we really need to take away, is that before we start doing things, we need to have all the people in the room and say, what's our end objective and how can we get there most efficiently? And also, there's been a huge flood of money pushed into COVID-19 that, especially in rare diseases, you know, frequently you're fighting for your share of the pie. And I think this really has been a very illuminating exercise of what concerted effort and money can do. That being said, not every disease is going to be able to get the same amount of money that a global pandemic gets. It's just not going to happen. But I think that, you know, we can take away the learnings about what strategic coordination can do. That being said, I'm really concerned about the idea of, you know, where's the my warp speed, simply because I think pandemics are different from other diseases. And I think we just happened to get really lucky with this pandemic that scientifically we were able to pick up, you know, 20 some years of lab work and use it. We're not going to be able to do that for all diseases. So I'm afraid that a lot of groups are going to be disappointed afterwards that, you know, wow, they did all this for COVID-19 and it's not translating to my disease. I think people are going to be disappointed if they think everything's going to change on a dime, because it's not. But I think there are definitely things that we can do going forward, and we should do going forward, that are different. But that's just my thought. I'd be really interested to hear what everyone else thinks.
Yeah, Alix, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is the most overused word of the pandemic, but is that ability to pivot. And I think we've proven in a kind of all facets of life that is very possible. So I just keep thinking of this one example. We have a family on the west coast of Canada participating in a clinical trial that is based on, you know, central to the east coast of Canada, and it's a very large country. So this family was flying back and forth to do their checkups and to, you know, do scans and all of that, because that was an obligation to the clinical trial, and they were, you know, really improving receiving this treatment. So it was something that they wanted to continue doing, even though it was a huge burden on the family, just logistically, financially, to just stop your life every few months to fly across the country. And so at the beginning, you know, the early days of the pandemic, they were due to fly eastward to have one of these checkups, and the hospital site was still wanting them here. But the family wasn't comfortable flying, of course. And that was, you know, we didn't have all the information we have now, and it was very scary and overwhelming, and it just wasn't necessary. So they reached out to us, and we connected with both the sponsor, the pharmaceutical company, and the clinicians. And we just had a discussion, and it was agreed that, you know, they could get the scans at their home hospital, and they could do some, you know, telehealth visits. And that was that solved. And I think that's something that we can really bring forward, especially when we talk about, you know, geographical inequities and things like that, to participate in trials and programs like this. We have the ability to kind of think outside of the box, and we've now proven that we can do that, and we can still have successful programs. So I think that that's something. And like Alison was saying, just collaboration. You know, Lucy and Mike, when you were talking about you really had to put so much of your life on hold, whether that was your career, you know, time with your kids, so that you could do this, like you could save your kids and do all this incredible advocacy. But the burden shouldn't be on families. It should be on the rest of us. It should be on industry, government, patient groups, to remove that burden and to come up, like, improve these processes and come up with solutions, and make sure that that's communicated with patients, with clinicians, so that it's not all on you, because it shouldn't be.
Thank you, Alix. There's lots of learnings that I think we can take, and hopefully things won't go back to what it was before, and that we can continue with some of the positives. I don't know, Lucy and Mike, if you've got anything else to add as we're coming to a near end about the pandemic and how it's changed.
Fundraising for us has changed hugely. We're struggling to get any fundraising, if I'm honest. And we're trying to fundraise for a treatment at the moment for the eyesight for the children, for Amelia and other children with CNL2, because we're having to fund this ourselves. The hospital, the NHS won't pay for it, so we need to cover the hospital cost. The drug cost is already covered, luckily. So we need to raise funds for that, but we are really struggling because of the pandemic.
And you've been given a target, it's 250,000, is that correct? Yeah, it's a big amount of money.
Yeah, that's right. And also we started fundraising in August, and we really need this money by about May, don't we? Time, hopefully. So it's a short period of time, and no one's allowed out their house to do anything. So everything we are doing is online, and it is just extremely hard, and again, time consuming. And I think going back to people working together, that's key in everything you do. And that's one of the things that really gets us down sometimes, is the lack of communication between all different organisations, really, and even parents, because communication is key to moving forwards. And if that's not there, then you're just going around in circles, and like it makes us feel like sometimes we're banging our heads against a brick wall, because information isn't being passed on. And then that again is putting more pressure on us as parents and taking more out of time away from our children and what we should be focusing on, really.
Completely agree. Right, I'm so sorry, we've got about 6 minutes left, so if we could just do a take-home message from all of us, so I'll kick off. So for other parents and families listening today, thank you for joining us. And if you are interested in early access, please reach out to your doctor, what we call a treating physician. So that's your specialist doctor that works in your condition. Speak to them about any options for trials and early access programs. And then please reach out to patient organisations, because they're there to support you. They've been through the experience. They have a lot of experience and knowledge to share, and you're not alone. And I believe that you're stronger together, like we've heard. And communication and collaboration is the key. So, Alison?
I mean, I guess I just want to say, even across international borders, the thing that seems to me is that frequently you have to get to a specialist to even start on the path to access.
Yeah.
So I want to encourage people to be strategic about, as soon as you've gotten diagnosis, don't just stay with your local physician. I mean, feel free to stay with them if you're comfortable with them, but also seek out a second opinion, because frequently people, as I said earlier, they don't know what they don't know. So, as much as it is a shame to put an extra burden on the family at this point in time, there really is this need to go seek out a specialist. And that can be both specialist clinicians and specialist patient groups who can push you forward. And I just want to encourage people to do that. And hopefully someday the burden will not be on you to do that. The system will be more suited for you, but for now you really need to do that.
Thank you, Alison. Completely agree. Alix?
Yeah, I suppose more of the same, just a patient group perspective, just like communicate openly and regularly with all of, with industry, with your patients, with government, with payers. Just be as open and transparent as possible. Transparent, I think transparency is the most valuable currency you have. And also reach out to people. Like, I don't know what we would do without people like Alison, because we go to her with, issues and questions all the time. And so just, think outside the box and talk to whoever you need to talk to.
Yeah. Lucy and Mike, we're here to help and keep communicating. And if anyone's listening and wants to follow their story, Ollie's Army, it's on online. If you put it into Google, it'll come up.
I was just literally about to say the same thing as Alex just said. Think outside the box, 100%, because obviously listen to your doctors, listen to your clinicians, take everything on board, but also listen to your heart as well. If you don't think something's right, research it, fight for it. We've been told so many things that we shouldn't do. We shouldn't have took on the NHS because we won't win.
You did.
But we got somewhere. There was no treatment, but there was. Research as much as you can. And just obviously with rare diseases, you've got to fight, and you've got to fight till your last breath, unfortunately.
And I guess, can I just add that, you know, in terms of companies and doctors, frequently, unless they've dealt with expanded access in the past, it's not something they even think of. So
Yeah.
thinking outside of the box, it really is important for you to present that option to them, because you're not going to get it if they've never even thought about it. So please don't feel adverse to being the one saying, have you ever thought about compassionate use outside of trials? And they may say, no, but at least then you'll have planted the seed and can follow up on it, and hopefully they will think about it. Hopefully not too late, given all those supply constraints I talked about earlier.
Yeah. I think everything in life comes back to, if you don't ask, you don't get, right? Just don't be afraid to speak to as many people as possible. And obviously that's what you guys have been doing amazingly, and raising awareness for all Battens families. And I really hope that you get the money that you need, and get Amelia on that compassionate use programme again to save her sight. We're all behind you. Thank you so much for taking an hour out of her special 8th birthday. And you know, I wish you all the best, and we're here to support you. And thank you again to the experts, to Alison and to Alix, for joining us today and giving all those insightful discussions, because it's left with a lot to think about, and I'm sure everyone listening has learned a lot today. And it's been really quick. I can't believe the hour's up, because we could carry on talking for a long time, I'm sure, but just wanted to say thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I don't know if you wanted to say anything else, Jeff. We've got 2 minutes to go.
2 minutes to go. I just wanted to say thank you to all the panelists that was here. You know, some of you have spoken even at Rare Fair. Alison, you've spoken at Rare Fair before, and it's always a privilege and pleasure. Lucy and Mike, making this connection. Through this connection through Battens, I actually made another that is now, I consider him a friend and a brother across the United States, in Christopher, whose son has Battens over there.
Yeah, he's amazing.
It's just, you know, incredible. And we talk about you all and the battle that you are fighting too. Naomi, thank you and Bionical for sponsoring the panel. What a great discussion.
Absolute pleasure.
It's a tremendous privilege. Thank all of you. Alix, thank you from way up north from me here too. And thank all of you who joined this session. We have a small break until the 1 o'clock hour. Go out and visit the networking booths, and then come back and check the agenda for the next session. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Happy birthday.